Hi everybody, thanks a lot for watching these videos on how to make your own crystal radio in a pizza box. I just want to leave you with some troubleshooting tips and also some ideas on operating the radio. As mentioned in the previous video, if the radio isn't working, the first thing to do is check your work, make sure all the connections are tight and secure. Just kind of go through here and make sure that those are all solid in their connections. Look over the schematic and make sure you put all the parts in the right order, and double check to make sure the diode is not pointed in the wrong direction. You see that little stripe there, and it needs to go in the direction of the the earphone eventually. I've got a speaker here, and I'm going to turn this on in a minute just so you can hear it, but that's where your earphone would go. It is kind of easy, sort of a rat's nest of wires here. It can be easy to kind of get all those wires wrapped around each other and yanked out, so make sure that you take your time when you're tuning in the various stations. You might think about putting some wing nuts here on these bolt terminals. I don't know if you can see that very well, but that might make it a little easier, because you want to make sure that those ring terminals and the magnet wire from the loop, all of that's a tight connection. Sometimes this copper tape, by the way, where the wires have been soldered, and then that in turn has been attached to the aluminum foil to make the capacitor, sometimes those spots can be a little sensitive, and you just want to make sure that those are secure and those are tight, because that will make a difference. Tightening or loosening, as you'll find out, this top nut has a dramatic effect sometimes on what stations can be heard, and also where you're going to find them on the dial. Unfortunately, the high impedance earphones, along with the diodes, the germanium diodes, those can be notorious for poor performance. So you just want to keep that in mind. So those are two components to pay attention to if your radio is not working. And last but not least, it's a good idea to try to listen in a quiet room. Keep in mind that the signals will usually be very faint, almost like a whisper. And for that reason, you also want to avoid fluorescent lights, because they tend to wreak havoc with reception. Now, let me go ahead and turn this on. You can hear what I hear. Now, there's several different ways to experiment with the tuner. First of all, pressure from your hands on the top of this, the rotor part is going to vary the frequency. Even side-to-side movement of the rotor is going to do the same. And you can kind of see the difference here as I make the circle here.
And so, sitting in a chapel of Eucharistic join the fans from all over the country, oriented toward liturgical celebration. One might transition from that to. I was talking about you last night. There was no shower. Restaurant. Oh my! Oh my! Oh my! Oh my!
Now, another experiment you can make is adjusting this loop antenna. Signals tend to come in broadside. It just means that right now I'm pointed north and south. If I were to turn this east and west, some of these stations would come in even stronger because they're to the east of me. So that's something you can experiment with. Also, on the capacitor, it's a good idea to keep in mind there's no stops that are built into that, and that simply means you're going to go through the entire range twice. The way the capacitor is built, you're going to reach maximum capacitance here when most foil is parallel to each other. You're going to go all the way around. On the opposite side is going to be minimum capacitance, the least amount of aluminum next to each other, and then you go right back around and get back to maximum capacitance. All that means is you're probably going to hear the same stations not once but twice as it makes its way around. You also, as far as experimenting goes, you can completely disconnect both of these wires from the variable capacitor. You probably will still hear something. It's because the germanium diode by itself is fairly sensitive to electromagnetic signals in the atmosphere. Crystal radios, and they've been around, believe it or not, for over a century. They're very sensitive. They pick up a lot of what's out there. They're just not usually very selective. It means you can't separate out all of these different stations coming in. So what that means is you can actually hear many stations at once. What the capacitor does in combination with the loop is favor certain frequencies and rejects others, and that's the way you're able to tune in a single station, but it's still very often you'll be hearing several stations at once. The way this radio is designed, it's not necessary that you have an external antenna, but that's another experiment you can try. If you are going to do that, you might try connecting it up, the antenna, to the stationary, the stator part of the capacitor. And if you want to try another experiment, do that along with adding a ground, and that would be to the rotor part. And just both of those terminals there, you can try connecting that up. It's hard these days to find a cold water pipe anywhere in modern houses, but it's worth a try. You can do an external ground and an external antenna and see if you pick up more stations. Just a suggestion, if you are using one of these for a science fair project, you might want to think about putting a funnel over this earphone. And obviously, like I've done here, you can also connect it up to an external amplifier, and that way it makes it possible for people to hear what you're hearing. Another suggestion, if you're not able to find one of these, there's a circuit that's built around an LM386, and you can actually find those boards online for very cheap. An LM386 and a battery and a small speaker is a way to get around having to use the earphone. The beauty of this, of course, as it was 100 years ago, doesn't require any batteries, and so that's kind of cool. Last but not least, I'm going to just mention I've been a ham radio operator for almost 40 years now. And hams, as they're affectionately known, have been experimenting with radio ever since those early days of wireless. It used to be, back in my day, you had to learn Morse code. That's no longer a requirement to get your license as a radio amateur. Even elementary school students have learned enough of the theory and the regulations to pass the test and get their ticket. This crystal set might be one of your first steps in what I consider to be the most rewarding, the most exciting hobby in the world, which is ham radio. So if you want more information about that, you might look up the American Radio Relay League, ARRL.org, and find out some more information. Once again, thanks a lot for watching.